Greetings, runners. My name is Byfear. So, some of you may have been looking around for Marathon Lore content, and in your searches you may have found someone called JakeTheAlright. I would say that Jake has made what is probably the most dedicated Marathon Lore content out there. Now, don't get me wrong, that is not to besmirch some other fantastic content that exists. Of course, there are the original reviews, which also kind of weirdly double as introductory lore videos from Mandalore. There are some fantastic pieces of content by Hidden Xperia, and there are many other small marathon creators out there who are making names for themselves. But personally, I think JakeTheAlright is the star of the show when it comes to marathon lore. So, I went ahead and sat down with them for about an hour and 15 minutes or so, just so I could pick his brains about what's going on with the new reveal and everything that we saw. There was a ton of lore discussion, and whilst I know a fair amount about Marathon lore, he really is what I would term to be the lore master of Marathon at this current point in time. So with all that being said, whilst we do stand on the shoulders of giants such as Hamish Sinclair, and whilst we most definitely will be pulling from old lore references that have been debated over for 25 odd years, I would go ahead and ask you all to take a listen to this, and if you enjoy what the conversation between myself and Jake was like, go ahead and subscribe to his channel. You'll find tons more Marathon lore and a lot of coverage of not just the first, but also the second Marathon ARG on his channel. And in future, I may go ahead and do more content with Jake and more discussions of things, but ultimately, I was just really keen to go ahead, take a look at the reveal, pick his brains about it, and see what we could discover between the two of us. So, that hour and 15-minute conversation is as follows. Go ahead and give him a subscribe if you're on YouTube, a follow on Twitch, maybe a subscribe on Twitch, maybe become a member on YouTube. Regardless of what you choose to do, I hope you enjoy all of this, and I hope that it's an informative discussion. So, that was a completely wild set of reveals. I wasn't expecting them to do as much with the narrative stuff as they ended up doing at the very end, but in particular, I think we got to start with the 8 minutes worth of absolute treasure that we got at the very end there, showing off various teams of runners and what was the... I mean, we just talked about this moments ago, but yeah, what looks like the initial invasion of Tau Ceti by the Four.
Yeah, just being able to get a visual representation of the events as they occurred plan aside is incredible. And then, like we're saying, also confirmation that it happened that way at all in this iteration that they're doing. Because at the beginning, the narrative director was on and she had said, you know, we're doing a lot of homage and, you know, treating the stuff from the original games as something we want to iterate on. But also she said it's that we are doing like a direct sequel to a lot of that stuff as well. So to see that canonized in the way that it was is profound, I think.
Yeah, and it's also really nice to see everything down on Tau Ceti as well, because I mean, people who have not played the original Marathon, or any of the Marathon games for that matter, being Marathon, Marathon Durandal, and Marathon Infinity, Tau Ceti was a location that's talked about a whole bunch, but we never actually visited. The entirety of the plot of Marathon takes place on either the Marathon itself, a 4-ship, the planet of Lo 1, if you go to Marathon Durandal, and Infinity is kind of all over the place. So yeah we'll leave that.
We get a little bit of the dream reality in the Jjaro station as well there.
Yeah, I Mark Sakur. I make myself sick thinking about timelines. Probably is the better way to describe it. But no, it's really cool just to be able to actually see the colony of Tau Ceti, and by the looks of things, not just one single established area to it as well, because we've got one that's sort of up on a mountaintop that's kind of next to this giant crater. We've got one that's a beachside. We've got the, I think it was the mire they called it, or the swamp. I can't remember exactly.
Oh, yes, Dire
area it
Marsh.
was.
Yeah.
Yes, the Dire Marsh. There we go. And it just kind of shows this entire thing is much more spread out over the entire planet's surface here. And I think the other thing too, this is something which I've gone back and forth on a little bit. Do you think that the colony that we're seeing now is partially built up from the new operations that have been brought in by the runners in the UASC? Or do you think that everything is also containing those old elements, or only containing those old elements? Because it's one of the things that I think is going to be a little bit disparate between potential perspectives. The stuff that we see in Marathon, all of it has this really... the new Marathon, that is, it has this really visually distinct style to it, right? But there's also a colony here which is 100 years divorced from the actual runners that are sort of walking all over it. And they've all still got the same kind of like bright color schemes and expansive technologies that are going on. And if you really think about it, the colony is really actually using technology that is 300 years old from their point of view. So there's actually kind of like 400 years worth of tech. Do you think that some of this is built up from new operations, or do you think that this is sort of a mix of the two time periods? What's your take on that?
I absolutely think that some of the structures that we're seeing have to have come later on, just especially now that we have the cinematic trailer, which there's a level of, artistic interpretation here, but there's a lot of kind of rust and weathering on some of this stuff that really is not present on a lot of the gameplay stuff that they have shown. Also, yeah, you're talking about this, 300, 100 years, but we did get confirmation in the UESC terminal that we just got in this, newest iteration of their ARG that they did, that New Caloric and Traxxas, they were partners for the Marathon project themselves, which is something we speculated on back in 2023 because the way that they built out the 25th century seemed to resolve a lot of the questions about how MITA and UESC and the Marathon project came about by injecting these companies, especially Traxxas and their role kind of in building the Marathon into it. And we get that confirmed through a UESC onboarding message from this terminal. And so to see the New Caloric logos on the stuff that we're seeing in the colony right now, that would be 400 years removed just from their design. You know what I mean? So when they're loading the New Caloric stuff onto the ship. So I definitely think it's a little bit of a mix of both. And also I'm interested to see what kind of communication capabilities did the Marathon have in this version? Were they able to maybe send messages or details or schematics or something back and forth a little bit quicker than what we're told in the original game when Leela's trying to send a message that's going to take, 90 something years to get back? But yeah, definitely some of this stuff seems like it was constructed during the kind of runner operations phase. And a lot of it seems like probably it was here when the colony was first established over that, 10-year period prior to the 4 showing up.
And then also, I think there's like a much bigger, further point. You talked about the communication delays and whatnot, which is actually a really important point within Marathon, just for the pure sake of technological advancement and the scale of all of that. I think that the other major point is that within the ARG, there is talk of a faster route to Tau Ceti that has been discovered, and basically there's a bunch of corporate espionage that's going on over that. So it's not just the advancement of technology and communication standards that's really been expanded upon. It's also, by this point in time, there may actually be FTL-capable ships, which is not something that the Marathon had. It took 312 years, I think it was, to get from Earth to Tau... Well, not Earth, from Mars to Tau Ceti 4.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 24 to 2400s, 2700s. Yeah, I remember that piece. I remember saying something about, maybe I'm using the wrong vernacular here, but it's like some sort of like slingshot system almost, where it's like they were possibly going to set up some kind of like relays in between that would allow the ships to travel faster. I think that especially opens up the doors to kind of additional narrative content they're going to introduce in later seasons. Just the idea that other humans might be showing up to Tau Ceti at some point and what their kind of goals might be in that regard.
Feel free to correct me on this, because this is late Marathon timeline stuff, which I may be getting wrong. But by the point where we're experiencing some of the events in this new Marathon, where it is the very late 29th century, so 2880s or 2890s, if I'm not mistaken. By that point in the timeline, if I'm not completely mistaken, isn't there a moment where the S'pht have basically allied themselves with humanity and they make a joint attack on the 4 home system? I'm probably getting a bunch of that wrong.
Yes.
But if that's the case, does that mean that the S'pht have been able to transfer some of their technology to humanity? And in that case, would that also include FTL stuff? Which adds this, if that's the case and if that's true, it adds a whole other dimension to the way that we are going to interact with this world and the way that travel is going to work out. Because for stuff I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, it also changes the dynamics of alliances and various things that you may interact with, brackets compilers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when trying to like understand what they could be doing here based off the stuff of the old games, it's just important to remember that every Marathon game starts with them retconning the last Marathon game. So like Marathon 2 starts with like, no, actually you got taken on the ship and now you're in Lohawan with Durandal. And then Marathon 3 starts with, nah, Durandal didn't actually, leave that system and, everything worked out. Actually, it ended, the world ended,
And
so
yeah, Infinity is retcons on top of retcons
Exactly.
within the actual story of itself.
Yeah.
You're retconning the universe until the working Kakanta doesn't defeat everything.
Yeah. But yeah, so this, we are seeing 2893. This is the farthest we've ever kind of seen in the timeline, except for obviously the very end of Infinity, I guess, which is technically like the closure of the universe itself. But there are a lot of things that, if they did happen, could have a huge impact. Yes, one, the S'pht technology in Marathon 2 and Marathon Infinity, we know that the S'pht and the S'pht Cur, one of the S'pht clans, has the ability to teleport whole like planetoid objects, and those technology that was given to them from the Jjaro. So that could potentially be related to some of the gravitational field disruptions that we're seeing in the gameplay stuff and in the cinematic trailer. But also there's humans. Robert Blake was a set of Bobs, or the leader of the Bobs, who were taken to Lohawan, and in the Marathon 2, it's said that he actually takes a 4 ship and heads back to Earth, and that they were the only survivors of Tau Ceti. So there's a lot of different technologies that could appear here, but my interpretation is that it feels like the stuff that happens in Marathon 2 and Marathon Infinity isn't being as relied upon, just because so much of what they have put out already has really built on the kind of political and corporate intrigue of the events that are talked about inside Marathon 1, specifically, that 25th century time frame. But yeah, obviously, definitely seeing some of the more abstract stuff that's occurring here, it's interesting to see which path do they choose, which timeline do they kind of adhere to more in terms of what happens between the 4 and the S'pht and Durandal and humanity. I definitely think that more of that stuff is going to be incorporated than what we would previously think. It's just how do they iterate on it and expand like on those concepts themselves.
Oh man, I'm gonna throw people through a loop with this one. I'm so sorry if you do not know any of the kind of backstory or lore to Marathon. Considering the way that Infinity works out, I'm pretty sure I've heard you say in previous content that you've made that you consider within this new Marathon timeline the Infinity like timeline jumping or potential timeline jumping situation to have been resolved. With that in mind, do you reckon that Bungie would keep that same single successful timeline where everything does actually work out and the working character is not unleashed? Or do you reckon that there are differences that might have been brought about, but it's still a quote-unquote successful timeline? So, in other words, let's say that you still have the key events required to cage the working Kakanta, which I think would probably be Thoth and Durandal uniting and becoming a single being or a dual being or whatever, but you still have other bits that have remained different and distinct. So, for example, it might be something along the lines of there is only a discrete alliance between humanity and the S'pht and the S'pht car, and in the end it ends up being that, well, if you run into a compiler in this time frame, they're not going to sit there and be like, human, how you doing? Instead, it's going to be like, oh, I don't know how to react to you. I'm going to need to go ahead and hold my fire and wait and see and treat you automatically as though you are hostile, right? Like, in other words, do you think that the timeline from Infinity is going to be consistent? Or do you think that there are going to be changes that they'll decide to make?
I think, I guess, sorry, I feel like I might not be as direct with my answer, but I think like the thing with Bungie...
I'm not direct with my questions, so go right ahead. Don't worry about it.
I think the thing with Bungie, and obviously like your understanding of Destiny might help to back this up or maybe invalidate, but my perspective is that like Bungie plays with a lot of like recurring thematic elements, that like this idea about sentience and how it adapts and evolves parallel with technology, humans' interactions with a larger kind of universe and the entities that exist within it. I think that these are a lot of like ideas that they continue to iterate on. But they're not always like direct sequels, you know what I mean? Or very rarely, I think, even they're not direct sequel. So while I think that they're going to take the core history and background of Marathon, I think the way that we will experience the working Kakinter and the Jjaro and the Pfhor and a lot of the stuff that we see later on in the original Marathon trilogy will just be like kind of new interpretations of those appearing. Because while I think that the working Kakinter appearing as an entity that adds a level of complexity to the narrative that they're telling would work, I don't know that kind of taking that timeline from the end of Marathon Infinity, albeit, it is successful in the sense that the universe is not ending from this Lovecraftian style deity, but I do think that they'll take a version of that and inject it into this story to kind of fit whatever the meta story is that they're trying to sell. And also another thing is that I feel like largely Marathon Infinity's a lot of stuff they do with the story there feels like a meta narrative to say that we're talking about the player, that like the player is literally the security officer in some ways. And maybe, this is obviously a big interpretation kind of thing, but like in the first Marathon game, like it's a screen, like you're playing the game through a screen that's, presumably being viewed by you, the player, but also maybe by Durandal, but maybe, you're a cybernetic potentially individual yourself, and so that can be viewed and interpreted, and part of Marathon Infinity and the structure of it and the reason why it's so abstract feels to me like the player, the characters, the security officer is experiencing a level of rampancy, which is another thing that I think they're really that's a concept that's appearing in this cinematic trailer as well, because we see the runners who also are kind of these synthetic entities mixed with biological consciousness, and that's having an impact on the way they perceive the world around them. They don't have the memories of them as children, and it doesn't necessarily seem like they have a home body. Like my interpretation prior to all of this was that it's almost like something you plug into, where like I'm in my body right now I'm going to connect to my runner, but I'm controlling it from my physical body. And even the language that they use in the gameplay, the longer extended gameplay overview trailer, they say you've like kind of shed your physical form. That might not be the words they use exactly, but it seems like there is no like physical person left. It's just a kind of loose conscious or sentience that's floating as data housed on servers, and that's being like plugged into these bodies, and kind of their relationship with their humanity is going to be something that's dissected, which if you are a fan of the original series, like I'm saying, seems like that should make you very excited, because I think that was a huge part of what we got in Marathon Infinity as well.
100%. Also, I'm gonna bring this up now. It's sort of momentarily it was glimpsed on the trailer that you are showing off in the background on your stream. We've got to talk about the very beginning of everything. The Pfhor attack that goes on in the background in the first few minutes of that trailer. People may not recognize what it is, but it even dates the exact moment. You see it in just a second where it says 2793. And that gives you the exact moments of the attack on the Marathon. That's really important for the sake of understanding what we're seeing in this point in time, and also because we've never actually seen this moment happen. Oh, sorry, not 2793, 2794 even. But I also wanted to go ahead and bring up one of the more important visual things that happens within that part of the trailer, which is we actually get a good look at a compiler, or a S'pht. And I think that matters because we've also seen a compiler in another trailer, and this ties into a bunch of story elements that we were just sort of bringing up here, but I think that it is more important because it's part of something that links Marathon in this age into the wider story of the universe, right? Because it's all very well to talk about the corporations, the runners, the Marathon, Tau Ceti, and everything that is going on this planet with the scale of it. But the compilers that we see in these trailers are really kind of the windows into the next big thing that will happen with everything to do with Marathon. And I think that it's also important for the sake of bridging through into what comes next. It's our link to the bigger story elements and questions, The compilers in Marathon and Marathon 2 formed an alliance with Durandal. Marathon is key with its story around AIs. And without the sort of presence of the compilers here in the trailer, it would seem as though there was a little bit of a divorce between all of that.
Yeah.
I'm just really excited to see that, but I want to get your take on where the direction of this goes, because this is years after the events of Marathon 2, if I'm not mistaken. It is very much... It's very much an open-ended question of why the hell are the compilers back? Are they friend or foe? What do we do from there? What's your take on where this is going, I suppose?
Yeah, I think so. As like an element in the story, I think that the S'pht themselves kind of mirror the conflict between AI and humanity, of these, you know, artificial life forms, biological life forms, and the story of the original games is very propelled forward by the conflict that arises between these two forces. You know, Durandal is feeling trapped and controlled, while simultaneously feels like he's a sentient creature that deserves some level of autonomy and freedom, and that's what compels him to seek to leave the confines of this reality, to escape, to, you know, become God. And humanity is trying to push back against that. And in the new Marathon ARG documents, we even have a letter from Bernard Strauss, who was Marathon's first science director and handled ensuring that AI didn't go rampant, or, you know, I guess it's open to interpretation, sentient, crazy, destructive. And he talks about in there is like all of these learning systems, you know, on a long enough time scale will become rampant. It's like, it feels like that's a natural evolution of any thinking being. And so us preventing them from, you know, attaining that level of sentience, consciousness, whatever you want to interpret it as, is kind of an affront to them as creatures. And so the S'pht, I feel like, operate as an example for humanity, as like, well, the S'pht were just life forms. They were biological life forms on a planet. And when the Jjaro got to their homeworld, they, you know, combined mechanical or technological features, you know, some sort of advanced far-flung alien tech, to make them whole. And so they kind of conjoined these things. So to see their presence here in this trailer, it very much makes me think that they're going to continue to draw that parallel, and then obviously introduce the runners into it. And I think that with the S'pht being here now, the big question to determine how that kind of colors the narrative as it goes forward is going to be kind of what you were talking about, the relationship that they have with Durandal. Has Durandal teamed up with them? Are they more in favor of the AI, who maybe potentially went to their homeworld to free them and fought back against the Pfhor with them? Or are they kind of, I don't know, understanding or amicable with humanity and not against them? And the S'pht were slaves when they first encountered humanity. So any aggression that they had towards humans isn't really, you know, it's not like it wasn't an intentional action. It doesn't seem like they have any grudge against humanity. They weren't, you know, colonial. They weren't trying to take over human locations or endeavors or dissect them or anything. It was purely they were slaves and they're being told what to do by the Pfhor. So the big question that we're just not going to have an answer to, I think, until they choose to reveal it, is at what stage are we at? Are the S'pht in any way under control, you know, by the Pfhor at this point? Have they entirely separated themselves from that and are associated with Durandal, who, also another thing that we haven't talked about from the gameplay trailer specifically, I believe we hear Durandal's voice, and obviously the tagline that they're going with for this game is a Durandal quote, so I think he's going to have a huge impact on the narrative here. And so just kind of figuring out which events are they canonizing and what stage they're at will determine whether or not they're friendly, hostile, their own players looking to help you or harm you. But it'll definitely be interesting to see, and also very kind of ethereal looking creatures here. So I appreciate this interpretation of their aesthetic as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, you took the next question I was really going to bring up on the next topic I wanted to touch on, which, no, perfect. Like, the voice in the trailers, the moment I heard it in the very first of the reveals, and then when I heard it again later, I think it's the same at very least, that continuously quotes the Ozymandias poem. The fact that that keeps on being brought up, and the fact that I believe it is the same voice each time, I'm very much of the opinion that it's Durandal. There is the outside possibility, I suppose, that it's one of the other 8 remaining AIs that's supposedly bound to Tau Ceti, But yeah, I wanted to get your take on that. Durandal, for sure, you think?
Yeah. Now, obviously, it could be a red herring. It could be like, hey, we're really talking up that this is Durandal, and like we're making him say all of the things. I mean, the exact quote from the trailer is "Death, the end of all things, but the dream is not over. My dream, yours. Now run." I mean, that is like very clear cut. The third terminal from Colony Ship for Sale is that kind of, escape from Make Me God terminal where he's quoting Darwin and how creatures evolve and what that means for him and what it means for you as a human. And I think them coming out and saying my dream, that seems like absolutely they're indicating that this is Durandal, because this is a kind of continuation of that dream he's had since 2794 when the Four arrived, and he kind of either initiated or kind of concluded his rampancy. I guess it depends on how you interpret it. But yeah, it could just be a red herring, and it's like we're going to play on these same concepts because assumedly, when other AI go through this rampancy, they probably come to very similar conclusions just because they're these hyper intellectual machines that can parse out logic, billion years into the future or something. But I do think that what they're absolutely setting up for is Durandal is going to be an entity within this game that is in some way driving this narrative. And I think he's going to have an affinity for the runners. And like I was talking about earlier, I think there's this huge parallel between the experience that these runners are going to have as these free-floating sentience existing on computer servers somewhere and the experience that Durandal is having. I almost wonder if the events that we're going to see play out in this new game are going to be much more in line with what we saw in Marathon 1 itself. Perhaps like Durandal being able to ally with the S'pht and fight back and escape the star system. Maybe that has kind of been delayed in this reality, and that's something that we're going to explore potentially. We've seen some stuff, about the Marathon, or maybe the Marathon might be a playable location later on. Perhaps we're going to have some goals or contracts, I believe is what they're calling them, that will be assisting him in achieving that goal from the original games.
Yeah, this was actually going to be another of my questions, so we'll jump to this right away. We saw that the word on the street from what the official press release is that Marathon is going to have 3 maps at launch and a 4th one that comes shortly after launch. We've obviously seen one of them with all of the gameplay that has just been released. I mean, one of them has got to be on the Marathon, right? Like, at very least, one of them has to be on the Marathon, not on the Colony. At least I assume it will be.
Yeah, for sure. And I can say that now my I guess a part of the NDA that I signed, I have played a pre-alpha version of the game a few months ago. And I'm allowed to talk about the stuff that was in there. And there are like resources and stuff that very heavily indicate that they may have came from the Marathon itself. And I think you're obviously missing out on such a huge opportunity if you don't, get onto the Marathon ship and explore it. Imagine if they bring back the lava, some of the really cool stuff as well, or G4 sunbathing, see what the communications array looks like. Obviously, in this cinematic trailer, we're seeing like a lot more damage. And also, I like to point out that the cinematic trailer takes a much more old school kind of approach to the vision of what the Marathon looks like in terms of how they portrayed it.
Yeah, the hollowed out version that we saw from some of the earlier stuff it seems like that's kind of the aftermath of whatever else has happened, right? Like, you're looking at the Marathon in its complete, more potato-esque form with everything before that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, potato-esque is a classic explanation there. Yeah.
Long live the potato. So with the Marathon probably being one of the things, but not confirmed that it is actually a map and a location that we'll be able to explore, there are some really exciting possibilities to go ahead and find there. I think the other thing that it ties in with my mind, at very least, is whether or not we're going to see some remnants of the Four. Because obviously, the colony itself was attacked. There was definitely the massive attack that happened on the Marathon initially, and then there was supposedly the point at which 3 months after the attack, which was repelled, the Four came and they completely sacked Tau Ceti itself. Mm-hmm. But from there, the word on Tau Ceti is kind of non-existent, as best I know. And that leaves a lot of open-ended possibilities. So I guess my big question is, we've seen that there will be compilers, but that does not necessarily mean that there will be Four. Because, again, there is the clear delineation of those two groups. Do you reckon that we might actually see some of them come along as a new faction of PvE enemies that we might have to face? And if so, how do you reckon that's going to compare to everything? Because we've already seen the UESC will be in there. We've seen that there's some other local wildlife. But do you reckon that ends up being more of a kind of almost a terrifying experience for the sake of, like, these enemies that we've never seen within the current context of everything? The UESC already looks like it's going to kick ass. Do you reckon that this is basically just going to be very enforcer heavy, like we've come for vengeance again kind of situation?
I think if we're trying to like figure out what the Pfhor's mindset, and like you're saying, obviously we have nothing to go on from these new games, no indication or reference to them. The only creatures we've seen are the S'pht, so like we would assume that they were brought here by the Pfhor and they were enslaved, because that's how it happened last time. But when I think about like how the Pfhor thought about the humans, I remember the simulacrums, which we learn, maybe it was in Marathon 2, but like the reason why the Pfhor started turning the Bobs, the humans on board the Marathon, into these exploding versions is because they found like there's no use for humans. Like they wouldn't make like great slaves because they're too kind of like individualistic. They're not going to be easily controlled. They're too destructive. So rather than going through the process of trying to enslave them in the same way that we did with the S'pht, for example, where we can like control them via this cyborg controller, or it seems like some of the other like Pfhor fighters and stuff are probably, I don't want to say like lesser life forms, but maybe more easily persuaded or simplistic when they were enslaved, by the larger Pfhor command. Humans like don't have that purpose or value to them. So if in this situation the Pfhor just encountered the humans, took this huge loss, lost a ship, had to deal with Durandal potentially, they might just say, yeah, we're gonna get out of here. We're gonna go get some better equipment. It's like not worth the fight. Like we have a whole universe. We have faster light travel. We're gonna need more resources to deal with this. And we also know that, like you were talking about earlier in the original games, one of the possible futures was that the S'pht and humans combine forces and sack the Pfhor home system. So it's not like we don't stand a chance against them. But yeah, I definitely think the interpretation they could be going with here is like the Pfhor were like, all right, damn, like those humans got hands. We're gonna take a step back here, peace out of this situation, and then maybe we'll come back at a later time. But I absolutely think, yeah, if when they do pop back up, they're going to be a very formidable threat. And in game, the enemy AI are very they're not, they don't, you can't just push them around. It's not like Hunt where it's like every single enemy is kind of like, there's a solution to them, and you just kind of do that and you can run by them as long as you know what's going on. Like these guys, they're pretty difficult. So I imagine the Pfhor would also be a real challenge. And I don't know if I'm as worried about the enforcers or the Drinial, the hunter precursors.
Yeah. Ooh. I mean, hopefully we get provided with like Zeus fusion pistols for the occasion of hunters and whatnot, but who knows?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this is very much a different turn to it, but keeping with the theme of just, hey, there's tons of aliens in this universe, and we've seen very few of them. However, I wanted to bring up something from the original reveal, not the reveal that happened recently, but the first time we ever saw anything to do with Marathon back in 2023. There was mentions of artifacts and prime artifacts, and I don't know if something has changed here and whether those have been dropped from development, because they were not mentioned in any of this. However, the artifacts in themselves are fascinating because of what the kind of premise of the game has evolved into being, particularly with taglines such as the Durandal quote of "escape will make me God," with the ideas that Marathon likes to present, where you have organic and synthetic life forms merging together and then potentially finding higher planes of existence, where you have AI such as Durandal and then Thoth merging and then attaining status as kind of godlike powers. You have a lot that specifies these ideas and kind of pushes towards the notion that our characters, our runners, might actually be able to follow in some of those footsteps. That's just my interpretation, but I want to get yours. What do you think the artifacts are? Because, like, there's a lot they could be, you know. It could be Jjaro technology that's been brought along. It could be something that is to do with the 8 remaining AIs in the colony. It could be something that has been left over from the 4. Like, there are so many possibilities. I love the potential idea of it being Jjaro, but that's just where my brain goes. And I wanted to tap yours and see where, you know, where all of this might lead from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And the artifacts are something I've been kind of really considering ever since that first trailer. So when we first saw that stuff, we're seeing these kind of glowing, very alien looking technology, kind of these blocky chunks, and they're talking about being able to combine them. So my interpretation of that was that it was this alien tech that we didn't fully understand, but we understand, you know, we put them together and maybe something happens, or it's an energy source, it's some sort of advanced weaponry, kind of like how the 4 were utilizing this, I'm drawing a blank on the name now, the weapon that would destroy, you know, an entire solar system, make a sun go early nova, the Trizine. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So like maybe we didn't fully understand it, but we knew it was valuable, and there's something advanced there. The only this is such like a deep thing that it's probably not relevant, but the only reference to artifacts that I could ever find tied to Marathon at any point came from an interview that Jason Jones had done after the release of Pathways into Darkness. And Pathways into Darkness obviously features the Jjaro in the working character, in the narrative. It's, I would say, it maybe some people would disagree, but largely fair to interpret Path of Darkness, or Pathways into Darkness, and Marathon taking place within the same universe. And in the end of Pathways into Darkness, the character Sergeant Eddings, blows up the pyramid and, saves humanity from awakening this sleeping working character god. And he goes back to the Pentagon, and, Bill Clinton and everyone's there. And they're like, so what'd you find in there? And he's like, he has these crystals that can do little things like, the ice crystal, does all this. And, he shows to him, and then they all burn out. And then he, this special operator dude with these crystals disappears for a little bit. And then, within the next 100 years, true artificial intelligence is born, and we start, expanding out in soul and all this. In an interview after Pathways came out, Jason Jones is talking about those artifacts that Sergeant Eddings had after the events of Pathways into Darkness. And he says specifically, where did all those artifacts go in between him taking, this vacation and the Marathon launching in the 2400s? And so that was kind of like my big through line. I was like, oh, maybe they're like kind of pulling on this idea that like this alien technology, either working character or Jjaro in origin, and very, very not completely understood, and it has these very surreal or abstract capabilities, are something that they're going to integrate into this game as kind of a rare resource or material, or something that pushes the narrative along. So that would be my thinking, is that they absolutely would be, like I said, this Jjaro working character technology that isn't fully understood, and maybe would interact in the world in some unique ways to unlock different areas. What I will say from like a gameplay perspective is that it seems like they've moved away almost entirely. I could be wrong, maybe it's something I didn't see, and what I saw was a work in progress, and this and that, but it seems like they moved away from the concept of artifacts generally and getting prime artifacts, but in place of that, I would say it seems like they're trying to approach it from, there are going to be huge secrets hidden on the map that are going to dive into that same idea about what kind of technology was here, what happened to the humans, what did the 4 leave behind, etc. But I don't know if that's going to be a narrative element that they continue to go down, at least in the same way that we saw it from that original Vidoc, in terms of like, we're going to get these floating tesseract kind of cube things that exist in the world. But if they are there, I absolutely suspect that's going to be tied to this kind of ancient alien, not wholly understood technology.
And I mean, just to go ahead and pull the other perspective for a second, if it does turn out that these have kind of been replaced for what is effectively just bigger in-map secrets, which is also another phenomenal way of telling stories and creating intrigue and hype, because I mean, that's exactly what, for example, COD Zombies does all the time. Mm-hmm. I think that you have a really interesting opportunity to tell stories according to what the map is, right? So I mean, like, it's one thing to sit there and talk about like, oh, this is a colony on Tau Ceti, or this is the upper limits of the colony's like highest outpost that it may have had. Giving us different maps on board the Marathon then becomes a really fascinating prospect. giving us ones on, say, the remains of a crashed 4 battleship that may have landed on Tau Ceti, even cooler. And it opens up the possibility for further expansions and content. I mean, what happens if one day they sit there and it's like, cool, here's a big expansion type thing to Marathon. By the way, the expansion is low 1.
Yeah.
Let's just go to the low 1 system, and at that point, you're working within the ruins of the S'pht, which also have intriguing links to not just the S'pht, but also the S'pht car, and then also potentially the Jjaro. You know, if you just happen to find one of those sites, and that's how they decide to do their storytelling, you get to tap into some of the wildest lore that Marathon has. And I mean, like, some of it is wild because it's just really silly. I mean, I always go back to the 1-4 who faked their own death so that they could and so they could just investigate further mysteries and whatnot, and they ended up having a tower named after them. Also looking at the bigger things that end up coming along from Marathon Infinity, such as, you know, this is the secret of the Flicker life cycle that eventually leads to the S'pht, and all of this other stuff to do with ancient alien races that impacts our own kind of views upon the universe and how we might actually escape to become God and things such as that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody just heard you say that and they didn't get chills, they need to go look at the Craig Mullins art of the Citadel, the Lohuan, S'pht structure, and imagine that in the style of this cinematic trailer we just got, because that would be astounding. Yeah, that would be super cool to see them expand in that direction. And I feel like Bungie is open to doing stuff like that. They're taking such a risk here in terms of the story they're trying to tell by bringing back this older franchise, but also, you know, from a gameplay perspective, kind of expanding in this different genre. I absolutely think we could see something like that, and it would be super cool. Kind of along that same line, if you don't mind if I ask you a question real quick. Obviously,
yeah, go for it.
You know, you're super familiar with the Mida multi-tool, Mida mini-tool, and my understanding is that was kind of pulled from another timeline or another universe reality. I don't know what the correct vernacular is in Destiny terms. Do you think that there's any possibility, given everything we've seen now, that this is actually just one for one the universe that weapon was pulled from?
Entirely possible, but I think it requires a caveat of saying there's nothing for that possibility and there's equally nothing against it, right? So it lives in the realm of possibility, but not swayed to either side. What I would say, though, as a bigger point to that, when the Mida weapons are brought up, I think the more pertinent stuff to think about when you're looking at just how those universes of Destiny, Marathon, and any Bungie kind of IP that they have made previously collides, they talk about it in Destiny as being the Paraverse, right? So it's kind of this infinite series of multiverses where a bunch of stuff has happened. And in the case of Destiny, the 9 pull these ancient powerful artifacts from the Paraverse and then give them as gifts to the player characters in Destiny, who are the Guardians. So, I mean, you know, that's how you get, say, the Halo energy sword equivalents, which aren't exactly the case because it's an energy sword that's been split in half and each half can be used as a sword. Or the Halo Magnum or Halo battle rifle. And equally, in Marathon terms, the shotgun, which is known as the Wastelander M5. And equally, if we are going to go ahead and take the same view of things, then yeah, that may be the way in which we acquired not just the Mida multi-tool, but also the Mida mini-tool. There is no confirmation of it in concrete terms, but it seems to be the only way in which we would have been able to get a Mida weapon like that in the universe of Destiny. And it seems even more fitting because of the simple fact that when you take a look at Mida mini-tool, its lore tab directly mentions Bernard Strauss, and I mean, not just tying him in and saying definitively that he was almost certainly a Mida member, but also it links to the further idea that we can pull these different characters into this timeline and say, yeah, they are being pulled from the Paraverse. Generally speaking, they are consistent within the timeline of Destiny, but only because they have been pulled, and they are consistent within Marathon's timeline as a result. It's, I don't know how well that effectively answers the question, but that's the kind of touch I get from it. You know, all of these things are equally canon in their own timelines, but when they get pulled from one to another through this method, It doesn't decanonize them in that sense. It kind of just expands the relevance.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That answered my question. And I'm glad. I just wanted to hear your perspective on it. I do think, like, obviously, Bungie hasn't run 2 live service games concurrently before. My assumption would be that, like, they don't want to turn people off of Marathon if they think that they have to learn all this stuff about Destiny. So I do think that they'll probably try to keep the narratives kind of separate, just so, like, there's room for each of these to breathe, and it doesn't feel like super reliant on one another. If maybe Marathon is something that attracts somebody who wouldn't have been attracted to Destiny, but there's just so much kind of opportunity for a level of crossover there that I would just I'd be very curious to see if they do kind of expand on that stuff more in Destiny or more in Marathon later on, just to continue to draw those slight little threads that connect the worlds, kind of.
Yeah, and I think threads is definitely the right way to go ahead and look at it, because inevitably there is going to be some connective tissue between these universes, as has already been established in Destiny. But I think that it's fair to sit there and say that if you wanted to go ahead and have this idea of there is a grand and very deliberate link between these universes, I don't think that's the case, right? Like, they exist kind of within the same multiverse type structure, with the Paraverse being the thing that links them, but they aren't necessarily in a position where something that happens in Marathon is going to then infinitely ripple outwards and impact what happens in Destiny, or vice versa for that matter. So it's just kind of an interesting thing of, like, you will get these little moments where things jump over and, like, tie back to themselves and tie themselves between one game and another. And, like, there is that consistent thread, and it may never get cut, but it's also never going to be something that supports a full story. You're never going to get a Marathon runner and a Destiny guardian just sort of dropped into the same area to sit down and have a conversation, in my mind. Or at very least, if they do, I'd imagine that would be kind of an extraordinary moment where it only ever happens once, and then it's not really, like, ever expanded on after that.
Yeah. Although it would be hilarious to see Drifter posted up saying some weird stuff on Tau Ceti Pfhor.
Oh, 100%. Drifter would 100% be giving you the pep talk before you go down for a run. Like, he's too used to doing it in Gambit.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. Speaking of stuff to do with this, Marathon has confirmed or at least the devs for Marathon in that reveal stream, they confirmed that there would be kind of like seasonal stories going on within the game. Do you reckon that kind of... this is my interpretation of it, right? I think that there is going to be a mix of things. You bringing up secrets on the map and hearing hearing from Jjaro that we would be experiencing secrets within Marathon generally, that combined with the various contracts that we might be getting from entities such as, say, Sekaguchi or Maida or Traxxas, that makes me think that those are kind of the two main pillars that we might see for storytelling within these seasonal stories. I want to get your thoughts on how you think it's going to manifest. Because ultimately, this is not a live service where you can go on specific story missions, right? Like, it's not going to be anywhere close to what we get in Destiny, where it's a tailored, focused campaign. It's got to fit into the narrative that you're able to tell inside an extraction shooter, which invariably is going to mean that it's going to have to be told differently. How do you think they're going to approach that? Like, I know I've mentioned two very broad things there, but, like, what do you reckon is going to be the real secret sauce that they throw into this that makes a seasonal story actually functional?
Yeah, so I think their contract system or their mission system is going to be the key to kind of like the large, lore dump kind of, Destiny has like the textile, the books, right, that you read, like just the raw narrative information out of. And in Marathon, they have this is like, if you're a fan of Marathon, you're going to, this is crazy. It's very cool. They have a terminal that as you complete contracts and gather stuff planetside, you can click through this terminal and read different files and source information, very similar to kind of like what we've been doing in the ARG even. So there's a whole like kind of storage, data terminal system for you to really kind of get a this kind of straight retelling or little pieces of narrative events. But where I think the narrative stuff is really going to shine is going to be in this environmental storytelling. And I feel like, every time you talk about video games, you're talking about, story and narrative, and if a game has good story, it gets there's this comparison back to like Dark Souls or From Software type stuff, and just to say that if you walk in a room on Tau Ceti and let's say it's a research center, it's like, okay, there's going to be stuff inside of that room that tells a whole story specifically unique just to this point of interest. And then you combine that with the kind of raw narrative information you're getting from the text terminals, the kind of raw information you're getting from these contracts, and what's being requested of you to do on the planet. And it's going to be this thing where you got to combine this whole pie, to make a cohesive understanding of the larger story. And then obviously that's going to be open to interpretation. But the stuff that it looks like they're doing, obviously in the gameplay trailer and stuff, you're seeing each individual building and its purpose, and the way it's destroyed, and the placement of things, and who's interacting there, and like how did this function when everything was going, and what has happened to it since then. Like Dire Marsh, is completely flooded. Was that like purely an environmental thing? Was that flooded intentionally for some reason? Was it caused by these other things? Or in the background of the gameplay overview, we're getting these really large rings, kind of like Halo rain style in the background on the planet. It's like, what is the purpose of those? And kind of just being able to absorb that while you're just getting this fun multiplayer PvP casual experience, and then having the option to really dive into it. So I think they're gonna do this thing where there's a lot that you can break down and analyze, but also just kind of like the transient nature of you're existing in these worlds long enough, and kind of subconsciously you're going to start to come to some conclusions about what is occurring. But I would definitely hope that they lean more into that environmental storytelling for some of the deep revelations that we're going to have.
Absolutely. I hadn't even considered environmental storytelling, but even just the idea of jumping into the old Tau Ceti, there are some really cool possibilities. I mean, this is totally out of nowhere. But just imagine for a second what happens if you see an old set of human bones that has been left under a red funeral shroud that is clearly the cloak of a compiler. Mm-hmm. Like, that's nothing to confirm that. I've not actually played Marathon or done any playtests. But can you imagine finding something like that? The intrigue and the stories that could come across from something as simple as that would be amazing. Yeah. And that's also to consider something else, which is that we haven't actually seen them introduce any new elements to the story outside of what we've seen in the ARGs. And, obviously things like, say, Traxxas, Sekaguchi, all of these corporations that, Traxxas at the very least had mentions in the prior games, but, there are some entities that are completely new. We haven't seen anything which I would class as being truly enormous in terms of its impact and being big. Like, say, a new alien civilization that we haven't seen up until this point. But when elements like that do eventually make their way into the story, it opens up a whole new box of possibilities in every direction of storytelling, including, of course, the environmental storytelling side of things. I mean, just for a little purpose of demonstrating this, we have no idea, or at least I have no idea what the fungus is. I'm sure you have a better idea. But can you imagine if the fungus is dropped by an entirely different alien species that we've never seen before? Yeah. Suddenly, that's a huge world-building element. And, I don't know what's going on with it. Again, I think you probably know better. But it is ultimately just another little example of, like, when you're sitting there and seeing all this stuff in an extraction shooter, the possibility for a really rich world to be built out like this is so awesome. Yeah. It makes you hope that they continue to add a ton of new maps and new experiences for stuff like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the fungus. I have been talking about the fungus like a lunatic for months now. I 100% think that the fauna, the fungi, there is something larger going on with the natural life on Tau Ceti as well that we're going to get more info on. And one of the I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Robert McLeese, who is the guy behind a lot of the stuff about the the flood from Halo. Had originally pitched a concept for Marathon 2 that there was going to be a fungal virus kind of thing. I forget if it was developed by the S'pht or something, but it kind of turned the 4 into these zombie creatures. But so you can see the parallel that obviously evolved into the flood that we got in Halo. But he did help write I'm not sure about this newest ARG stuff, but he was involved in writing the ARG stuff from 2023 as well. And then the prominence of some of this floral and, like I said, just natural stuff and how that could impact it is definitely going to be a big deal later on. And yeah, where you're saying the narrative could go, it is really cool. A lot of the opportunities for them to expand on, and I think that's kind of just a mirror to how the Marathon community has existed for the past 30 years. We got these 3 canonical games, and then Greg Kirkpatrick, the original writer of the Marathon games, he kind of went over to Double Aught, and they were going to do something, and that project never got off the ground, and we got like a very like low profile AMA from him with a handful of questions, like maybe 7, 8, 10 years ago or something. But there's really not like a huge amount of stuff out about Marathon. It just, it's 3 games. Not that it isn't huge. I mean, obviously there's a lot to dig into, but it just goes to show you like how expansive the universe is, that people can still talk about it today in the way that people were even doing 3 years ago before any of the new stuff was out. And they have a lot of room to expand into. And I think, like, if I had to speculate and guess, I would say that that's what they're going to do, is like really build the kind of upfront story about, let's identify like what is different from what we know about Marathon. Like maybe that's the big story of the first season or first 2 seasons or something. It's like, let's figure out what the difference is, because something different happened here. Like obviously all the events we saw in the original game probably aren't canonical, like one for one, and that they weren't canon to each other even. So like, let's figure out what is the big difference in terms of what's occurring, and then they're going to get into like, all right, let's see how everything shakes out when we introduce all these other characters and factions and entities and different stuff from around this big universe.
Absolutely. This is kind of the joy of something like this. It is the joy of finding something new, right?
Yeah.
You have the ability to sit there and experience a universe that, in the case of many people who have not played the original 3 games, is just completely bespoke to them. But you also have something that has really old bones, in the case of something that we have played, that now is getting a fresh coat of paint, and they have the ability, as you say, to explore in any direction. I do actually want to go ahead and ask about this as well, because it is something that we see in the cinematic. It just passed by on the screen for your stream that you're showing off. There are these moments in the trailer, very briefly, where we see that kind of temporal anomaly. And the guy just kind of, blooms, I think is the word I'm going to go with here.
Yeah, blooms.
Okay, so I've got to bring this up here just as a little aside, because it's very freaky for starters, but also, it's starting to remind me of the very beginning of Marathon Infinity and whatnot. I don't want to go full crazy Working Carpenter is here conspiracy on this, because I definitely think that it's one of those moments where we don't know a lot, and there are many things that could have done something like this. The line that sticks, in my brain at very least, is that it was as though the universe had forgotten the rules by which it operated. That's the line I think that for Admiral Pfhor uses when describing the effects of the Working Carpenter. And you know what? Let's actually just start there fully and explain what that is. To sum it up really quickly, Working Carpenter is an eldritch god.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like this ultimate boss of Marathon Infinity that you're constantly working to fight, but never actually physically fight.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it just eats timelines and whatnot if you're not careful. Maybe not literally, maybe literally. It very much looks as though this is the universe as this man is blooming and exploding, but not really exploding. It looks like the universe is suddenly forgetting the laws upon which it's based as he starts floating as he goes into this strange, translucent energy field. Do you have any other idea of what this might be? Because my brain immediately goes to, oh, that's the scary, big possibility. It's a very weird thing from the trailer, but I actually did want to go ahead and pick your brains on it anyway, because who knows, there may be other things that I'm missing. I wanted to pick your brains on it.
Yeah, I think the Working Character obviously is kind of the most abstract, like you said, like Lovecraftian concept from the original game. So obviously when we're seeing something that is this absurd and like befuddling and really doesn't align with any of the technology that we know about from the 4 or humanity, I absolutely think it's a fair kind of route to go down. Now, it is kind of described in like Marathon Infinity as being like this, it's almost like this entity of entropy, right? It's just like making things kind of ultimately chaotic, and it kind of seems instantaneous, and like even their escape in a solar system seems to destroy everything that orbits it in a fairly short amount of time, like a handful of minutes, it seems. And so this is definitely something they could be capable of, but I almost just I view like that concept of the working character as something that's more destructive almost. Like if they were unleashed, it would be like a planet is turned into this bloom effect almost. But yeah, maybe we're getting pieces of them, or this is a interpretation of them, and they're kind of creating this effect where in an instant, or in a moment, this area or a line or a point in space can become instantly chaotic, where every single atom in existence in this area is like disrupted, to some sort of degree that causes this unfathomable goo situation for a human. And also it's like this doesn't really look like a runner, right? But it is kind of exploding into these very strange colors. Now, maybe that's a thing where it's like they just didn't want it to be incredibly gory or something. But also, if it's an interpretation where it's like literally this is what it looks like, it's like even changing what you would expect the interior of someone's body to look like. So definitely could be that. My first thinking is that it's like some sort of advanced teleportation technology that is either disrupted or incorrect, and it's creating these kind of fields that end up existing in locations that they shouldn't be, like kind of this classic sci-fi trope. It's like, well, the top half of my body got teleported onto the ship and the bottom half of my body is, on Venus or something, crazy. And their appearance over the Dire Marsh map as well, it kind of is underneath, makes me think that maybe it is tied to some sort of technological malfunction. Maybe potentially when, Durandal got access to this upgraded teleportation technology from the Four, maybe in this reality it didn't operate as well, and it kind of created these slices in reality where this, all the matter in that area is existing in multiple places at once or something.
This is the joy of seeing a trailer like this, though, too, because we genuinely have no clue at this point in time, but it's just the possibilities for speculation run wild.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I absolutely adore about any new universe that I get to jump into, is just the ability to sit there and ask questions that don't necessarily have answers yet.
Yeah.
That's a really cool thing, even just in little moments like this in the trailer for Marathon. The one thing I am going to go ahead and say is, if it is a working Kakanta type situation, which again is immediately a jump because it's the most extreme possibility that absolutely would have far bigger consequences, it's just very interesting to me that this is a bridge over what looks like a chasm or perhaps a crater. And, if you remember Pathways into Darkness, there is an asteroid crater in which one of the working Kakanta is slumbering. And strange things happen around that crater. It's not always the case that people bloom into colors like this, but it is also very much the case of horrifying, terrifying things happen. That's another crazy possibility for all the nonsense that could have been going down. But again, totally unconfirmed. A working Kakanta on Tau Ceti would be that would be a terrifying twist, but also nothing confirming it.
That could also, the kind of the big thing from the thing that points people towards the Jjaro being at Tau Ceti is in the original Marathon games, there were hidden messages, on the maps. And so we get one of those hidden messages that said, Jjaro, we're at Tau Ceti. And we know that, like in Pathways, the reason why the Jjaro sent a hologram of an ambassador to Earth is because the working Kakanta were there. So it really, if they wanted to canonize, like, okay, why would the Jjaro be on Tau Ceti? Like, well, we could say, it's like a super Earth planet. Maybe they're looking for habitable places. Maybe they have similar biological structure. Maybe, there's a lot of reasons they could go there. But the reason that we have, like, we can point at and say, well, we know they have showed up is, because working Kakanta are there. In Lahuan's star system, they were there. The working Kakanta were there. That's how they got trapped in the sun. On Earth, they were there because a sleeping working Kakanta god was there. So if they do want to introduce the idea of the Jjaro being here, that would absolutely be a great explanation as to why they had some kind of presence there, in the past.
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, we've been recording now for about an hour or so. I don't know if there's any other questions on the flip side of things, but like, I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to sit down with you, Jake, and just, for starters, probe your brains, because whilst I know a modicum of stuff about Marathon, I think it's fair to say that you have basically claimed the title, rightly so, as the preeminent Marathon Lore Master. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to think about.
Well,
or
I
discuss while
believe
we're here.
I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I think what people have very kindly called me is, oh, he's the Bife of Marathon. So I appreciate you. Some people have said so.
Well,
Nice
hey,
compliment.
I appreciate that, but like there's a bunch of OGs.
Yeah.
Is it Hamish Sinclair? I
Hamish
believe, who
Sinclair
created-
running the Marathon story page, Carnimir's Lore Archive, Jjoku
Yep.
on YouTube, who does like the most in-depth Marathon 1 breakdowns. Obviously, Mandalore and Hidden Experience stuff is really great. There's a ton of like smaller videos out just kind of diving into Finrick as well on YouTube is another one who's done some really great stuff. Ghost Virus. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of all the other. Yeah, there's a ton of people. And for, like I said, for 30 years, people on forums who aren't named. Tree Llama as well, the guy who was in the first ever Marathon online game. He did a lot of work on the LF1 project. You know, what's his name?
Collectively, we all stand on the shoulders of these giants.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Tons of amazing people.
Yeah, and even the people who are more recent to this community. Like, I mean, I say recent to this community. Before the reveal even happened, the Mandalore videos on Pathways and Marathon came out. But I think it's fair to say that, like, you know, some of these moments were the introduction for a lot of people to just sit there and, like, gain the big insights that they wanted or needed into the universe.
Yeah.
You know, like, that would have been a lot of people's start points for it. It's so cool just to sit there and see all of this.
Yeah. And it really speaks to how amazing Jason Jones and Greg Kirkpatrick's and Alexander Seropian and Doug Zartman and Robert McLeese, like all these people who worked on this project, they really did have something special that, you know, it could still exist in this capacity for so long and affect so many people.
Absolutely. Going back to the original question, is there anything else that you wanted to go ahead and bring up before we potentially bring any recording to a close? Because I feel like I've potentially missed something, but I don't know that for certain. And if not, I mean, that's okay. But yeah.
I think the other thing that I would want to just touch on briefly is that in this ARG, kind of one of the recurring themes across the Escape Will Make Me God website or escapewillmake.me website, the in the Discord, the stuff we're seeing potentially from Durandal or whatever rampant AI is, we keep getting the and also in the cinematic trailer, we keep getting the Ozymandias poem, which, you know, I'm not I'm not literary analyst. I'm not like super trained or anything, but my understanding, you know, my brief understanding of the poem is like this kind of concept that this king or something, or, you know, this ruler had this, you know, statue or monument built to how great they are, but it was kind of their hubris that ultimately led to the destruction of their kingdom. And the only thing that's left is this, you know, wretched, terrible structure, and after everything's destroyed in its dystopian environment, and even here in the trailer we're kind of getting the shot where there's some sort of buried statue a la original Planet of the Apes, like, you blew it all up, you know, kind of thing. I do think that that's very intentional in terms of kind of making a lot of different statements about a lot of different elements within the narrative as we'll see it. I think that could be a metaphor for the UESC and how their hubris of wanting to control people has ultimately led to this destruction because they didn't care about people, they cared about power and expansion. Or maybe what we're looking at here is the hubris of corporations and how they're putting profits above lives and you know, in that regard. Or maybe we're looking at the hubris of Durandal, who thought that he could escape the confines, and he didn't take into consideration that while he views himself as this sentient being, that all of these other people that he impacted with his decisions were also sentient beings. And that's what's left in the wake of this destruction from all of these entities operating within one space is, you know, this, a dystopian futuristic world where people are slaves to corporations and trying to get enough money so that they can get put into a biomata shell. And obviously, like, humanity has suffered a great loss here, and there's a bunch of alien races that are also going through some very difficult times related to that. So I just think, as a touching point, the Ozymandias poem and the potential implications of what they're saying about all of the entities within this game and the broader universe is going to be like a recurrent thing that we could probably come back to and point out, like, okay, that's probably a good understanding of why things are playing out the way that they are.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I mean, yeah, there are very few characters within the universe of Marathon that don't touch on hubris. I mean, you mentioned the UESC and Durandal, but, like, the Four and Admiral Fear, for example, is another great one with, the events at the end of Marathon 2.
Yeah.
Everything that then follows up immediately after that. And then even just looking at characters like Tycho, who had the hubris of believing that they could best Durandal, despite the fact that he easily lays traps for Tycho on a semi-regular basis throughout different timelines. Yeah. It's just, now that you bring it up, it's actually kind of brilliant because, this is absolutely everyone within the Marathon universe, with the exception of like a few small protagonist characters. And I don't mean protagonist in just purely there from our perspective. I also mean that in the sense of like, if you looked at the main character of the Marathon games, it is arguably Durandal, but he still falls into this trap all the time. Meanwhile, I'd say that it's maybe only, the security officer, maybe Bobby Blake, maybe the S'pht, who don't actually fall into this sort of category, and they're suffering at the hands of all those beings who do fall for that trap of hubris. Which is it's kind of amazing. Like, I'm so glad you brought that up. Thematically, it's absolutely a brilliant through line.
Yeah. And also, I'm obviously getting this spam in the chat. I have to mention it to you so that you continue to utilize it in your analysis of Marathon lore. Obviously, the blue fork is the most relevant piece of canonical information we have, and I'm sure all of this ties back to that as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. What is the blue fork?
The blue fork. Oh, okay, all right. Listen, the blue fork. This is we waited for over a year.
Let's do this.
And what was the first thing that we got from Bungie about Marathon after all this waiting and us being, crazy here thinking about it? We got a runner helmet for the Festival of the Lost, which featured a glorious blue fork on the side of it. And I think that's about it. and because that was the one thing we got, we put a lot of stock into it. And now we're a Blue Fork cult, and here we are. So if you see any Blue Fork connections, just know it has deeper meaning. Fork is the path forward. Thank you, Michael.
I mean, look, listen, they put it on the side of that rover that you've got pulled up in the moment in this trailer. So, like, I had to sit there and ask, is it a deeper connection? Can we go deeper? Like,
well, the color of the rover is also the same color of the fork. So, just waiting to be analyzed, I think.
You see, I don't know how this is the case, but it is all connected, and when I find out, I'm gonna blow the doors off this thing.
That's the Bife quote we need. And now we're gonna have you like in front of the red yarn board with a blue fork in the middle.
The Pepe Silvia board, yeah, 100%. Yeah. Nah, oh god, those memes literally exist of me too. Which is, don't let me encourage your community. They'll do that for you as well with the blue fork.
Yeah, absolutely.
But absolutely. Jake, it's been absolutely fantastic. I hope we get to make more Marathon content talking about lore and things in the future, because honestly, it's been such a pleasure sitting down and talking to you. And I hope that more people go ahead and check out your content, because again, I think, for what it is worth, it is currently the most in-depth and detailed breakdown of what I'm going to call contemporary Marathon, as in the stuff from 2023 and now 2025 and everything that has come along with the new game. Like, it's the best breakdowns that you can get on YouTube, and it's the most detailed. And I really was keen to go ahead and jump in and do content with you in particular, because I don't think I found someone who has made better dedicated content to it. So if you are listening to this and you're on my side of things, JakeTheAlright on YouTube, the link is going to be in the description. Go ahead and hit a subscribe if you're at all interested in Marathon lore. But thank you so much for taking the time to sit down.
Dude, thank you. I truly appreciate it. And obviously, huge fan of your videos. And I've been getting into Destiny over the past few months, and I have my lovely Sherpa Ace Traveler in the chat, and we're running Vow the Disciple tomorrow for the first time. And so you've been a big help trying to understand everything.
For the first time?
So, yep. Yeah.
Oh man. Oh god. I need to sit there and you doing Vow for the first time is so exciting, purely because Vow is okay. What? I will not spoil you, but environmental storytelling in that raid is the best in the entire game. Like, it's just phenomenal. Awesome. Keep looking for stuff. You'll find more cool things. Awesome. I will leave it at that. I don't want to spoil any of it for you. But yeah, dude, it's been fantastic, and onwards to more Marathon things as time goes on. I guess I shall see you in the closed alpha.
Absolutely, dude. I'll see you later. Thank you so much for doing this again.